The Utah Jazz started the 2021 season 4-4, and then they went on to win 20 of their next 21 games. There's a reason why. Let's talk about it. Now, I want to make one thing very, very clear to every NBA fan. The Jazz team we saw in 2020 is totally different than the one this year. Many of the guys last year are still trying to recreate their new roles on this Jazz team. So while this year, this roster may not be much different than last year they didn't have a full regular season to find a new offensive identity, and the same exact thing can be said with their defense, because they had just brought in Mike Conley, Bojan Bogdanovic, and then eventually Jordan Clarkson. On top of all that, they moved Joe Ingles to the bench. So there are a bunch of changes going on in their starting lineup. That's not to mention the fact that a lot of these new players are struggling. I'm really talking about Mike Conley, because last year he struggled early on. And despite all of that, this year he's been totally different. For the Jazz last season, especially in the bubble, they had a lot of injuries. Mike Conley missed a good amount of the year, so that didn't do them any favors when they were trying to find their new identity, on top of the fact that when the bubble rolled around, they were missing Bojan and Mike Conley for some of the seeding games and the first two games of the first round. And because of that, they were starting Juwan Morgan. And safe to say, he didn't provide much for them, because outside of Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, and then either Jordan Clarkson or Joe Ingles, nobody on this team provided much offensive impact, so they relied on Donovan Mitchell to get things going offensively. And safe to say he did, because in the 7 playoff games they played in, he averaged 36 points per game on 22 shots. Now, off the top of my head, the only other player in the modern NBA that's done what he did last year is LeBron James in 2018, when he had to do that crazy carry job without Kyrie just to get to the finals. And that's not even the craziest part about that. In game 1 against the Nuggets, where he put up 57 points, which is 3rd all time in a single postseason game, they ended up losing that because they didn't have enough scoring outside of him, Jordan Clarkson, and of course Rudy Gobert, the man in the middle. And now this year, with getting Bojan back and having Mike Conley healthy outside of these most recent 6 games, they started to really establish that offensive identity that they didn't have last season, because Rudy Gobert this year has developed massively as a role man. Because of that, they've been one of the best teams in the NBA. I think they're going to keep up their level of play in terms of shooting, because with the way they're utilizing Rudy Gobert downhill, it's allowing a lot of their shooters like Joe Ingles and Bojan Bogdanovic to get open looks. Now, to start the season, Bojan didn't really play that well. He was shooting rough, but it didn't really surprise me. Bojan hadn't played in like 10 months, and because of him not playing for so long, he was going to be rusty early. But if you take out the first 10 games of the year and their most recent 2 games where he struggled from 3, he's been really good for them this season, and he's been shooting the same way he did last year. And there's no doubt in my mind he's still capable of fulfilling the 20-point per game shot creator role that he created for himself these past 2 seasons in Indiana and Utah. I can't talk about the Jazz and not mention Jordan Clarkson, because whenever Bojan does have a bad night, Jordan Clarkson's going to come in off the bench and pick up the slack. The most recent example of this was against the Sixers, where Bojan was 0 for 6 from 3, I believe, and Jordan Clarkson casually comes in off the bench, puts up 40 on the Sixers' heads. That goes to show how scary this team is offensively, because not only do they have Donovan Mitchell, but they also have 2 other guys who are more than capable of dropping 20 points per game on any given night. With them bringing in Bojan and moving Joe Ingles to the bench, it took him a while to find his new role on the team, because he had really established himself a really good connection with Rudy Gobert. But this year, he's been amazing for them, not only shooting the ball, but playmaking like he has in the past. He's also been a good defender, and because of that, while I didn't put him in the thumbnail, he is my favorite player on this Jazz team. And Royce O'Neal this year has been amazing for them too, and I know he's only 6'4", but he has a 6'11" or 6'10" wingspan, and he's been a pretty good rebounder for them as well, and he's been shooting 42% from 3, and those 2 guys have been huge positives for this team on offense, because they really spaced out the floor for this team. And with Rudy Gobert setting screens up high, it's allowed some of those guys to get quality looks. So this Utah Jazz team has not only Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, and Bojan Bogdanovic, but also Joe Ingles and Royce O'Neal getting good quality open looks, and they're getting hot. They're unstoppable offensively. Right now, they're shooting around 39%, which is 3rd in the league, surprisingly. So I don't think shooting consistency is going to be too big of a concern for the Jazz this year in the playoffs, because with Rudy Gobert continuing to be a really good role man for them, it's going to allow those shooters to get established early in the first quarter. Defenses are going to require a lot more attention to him. That's going to space out not only their shooters, but it's going to allow guys to attack the rim like Jordan Clarkson, and of course Donovan Mitchell. And the craziest part about Jordan Clarkson is that when he first came into the league with the Lakers, he wasn't much of a 3-point shooter. He shot 31% and he wasn't taking many attempts per game. Now, outside of those guys, I talked about Bojan, but I didn't talk about Derrick Favors. I know a lot of Jazz fans are high on him. He's one of the better backup centers in the league. This year, per 36, he's averaging 4.5 offensive rebounds a game, so he's a great rebounder, especially offensively, as you can tell. And he's also a pretty solid post defender they could use whenever Rudy Gobert is in foul trouble. And above all else, he's shot well this year from the foul line, a career high 80%. And on his career, he's shooting about 66%. So while it's only on like 1.5 attempts per game, it's still a positive thing to see from him. And now the reason why I titled this video, "The Utah Jazz Are an Anomaly," is exactly for those reasons. Guys like Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, Joe Ingles, and Derrick Favors have all taken steps in the right direction for this Jazz team, on top of guys like Royce O'Neal taking steps into the right direction in terms of their shooting. And because of that, this Utah Jazz team went from a 6th seed last year to the 1 seed this year. And now last year, they were only 2 games away from being the 3rd seed in the Western Conference. Now the season was shortened, so those 2 games will be worth more this year. However, that Jazz team last year went through so many different things, from injuries to guys like Mike Conley and inconsistencies with them when they did come back. But this year, with that identity being established, using Rudy Gobert to the best of his ability as a role man, allowing for more 3-point shooting, they've become one of the best offenses in the NBA and rather easily a top 5 team. The way Quin Snyder's designed this team has been terrific, and it's not really Quin Snyder's team, but the system he has set in place with really good perimeter defenders surrounding Rudy Gobert. This year he's been terrific, not only protecting the paint, but really disrupting guys trying to finish inside, and that's been so difficult for other teams in terms of their field goal percentage, because sometimes these guards are in transition and they legit get scared of Rudy Gobert running behind them. And it's pretty hard for this team to really get stuck in mismatch situations, unlike most other teams in the NBA. With this Jazz team, they don't really have that defensive liability, and if they do, they're so interchangeable to win possessions because of how good they are in terms of shooting, to allow 1 or 2 of those guys to come out of the game and still not lose any impact offensively. And Quin Snyder's done a great job minimizing Rudy Gobert's weaknesses in both offense and defense and kind of maximizing his potential on both ends of the floor. But with this Jazz team, they're great at what they do, and it's really not too confusing offensively. They really have a 4-at-1-in look, and sometimes Rudy Gobert gets driven out to the perimeter. They'll set a bunch of screens to get switches, and that is how they really do their damage with some of their shot creators like Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, and Bojan Bogdanovic. And I want to give a ton of credit to Mike Conley, because last year he didn't really understand this team, and it was kind of difficult for him transitioning from the Grizzlies to the Jazz. He went from Marc Gasol being his mate to Rudy Gobert, and that's 2 totally different players on offense. And then defensively, he had to go from the grit and grind style of play in Memphis to a system predicated off elite level rim protection and great perimeter defense, and that's not something he's really been used to in Memphis, because their approach defensively was quite a bit different despite them having similar defensive personnel. With guys like him and Royce O'Neal being fantastic defensively, they have made it very difficult for other teams to score on them. And in these most recent 6 games, they've been without Mike Conley, and they've had Joe Ingles in the starting lineup, and they've still been really, really good offensively and defensively, just as good. They've beaten many playoff teams. As a matter of fact, every team they beat in the stretch has been a playoff team. The Heat, who are still a playoff team once they're healthy, the Celtics, Pacers, Sixers, Bucks, and Clippers. They actually embarrassed the Bucks. The Bucks really stood no chance against them, partially because Mike Budenholzer isn't a great coach at adjusting, but it's also because they outplayed the Bucks and the Clippers. I think this team is as good as it really can get. I think they really have hit their ceiling as a team, and because of that, they are head and shoulders above every other team that they played this season. And even Lloyd Pierce went as far as to say 2 days after playing the Lakers that this was the best team they played so far this year. But they've been way better than not only me, but every other NBA fan could have anticipated, and I think because of that, they should still be the 2nd best team in the Western Conference. This team is not frauds, because they've embarrassed a lot of the best teams in the NBA. And once again, they've won 20 of their last 21 games, so they're clearly doing something right. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. While typing out this script, I did not anticipate it coming off the way it did, but this Jazz team is one of the best teams in basketball, and I think they are the 2nd best team after the Lakers. And I understand they've looked better than the Lakers so far this year, but we all know the Lakers are going to pick things up during the playoffs. But other than that, my name is John, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, until next time. Peace and have a great day.